Hey guys, Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker here. So, the GH6, a bunch of things leaked out a couple days ago. I know I'm late, but I took a look at the leaked video that has now been taken off, and then I looked at the full white paper that was also leaked out to see what do we have here with the GH6. Is it a worthy upgrade from the GH5 or GH5 II? Is this camera even still relevant? Let's dive through everything that I found and let's find out. First things first, there's a new sensor. It's a 25 megapixel, so it's a bump up from the original GH5's 20, and it has a high readout of about 300 frames per second is what it's capable of. And it also is paired up with a new Bionic engine or Venus Bionic engine, and this is all going to come together with all the features I'm going to talk about right now. So I know you guys are going to wonder, autofocus, did they finally fix the darn thing so we can use it? Kind of, but the jury is still out. We still need to wait. Because if we take a look at the leaked video when he did the autofocus test, as a YouTuber, when you're just holding up something, it's fine. It does more or less what, a Sony camera can do. And I think for YouTubers, that's just fine. But if you are in a narrative scene or you're trying to track something, as he was walking towards the camera and coming back from the camera, it seemed like as it got closer, it would miss a little bit and then eventually catch on once you slow down. So it doesn't seem to stick as much as a Sony camera, in my opinion. And the other thing to note is that he is shooting at 60 frames a second and possibly 1/100th of a shutter speed. I'm not sure if that's what that part meant, which means we don't know as narrative filmmakers if we can use autofocus in a pinch, because most of the problems stem from if you were shooting 24p, that the autofocus wasn't reading fast enough and it couldn't just stick onto you. 60 frames was better. So this is still a toss up in the air. I'm not happy the fact that this is still a depth to focus system. It says so in the white paper. I thought there was a rumor about a hybrid autofocus system. Not sure what that meant, but in the white paper it specifically says DFD. Moving along, because of this new sensor and the new processing engine, we do now have more or less full V-Log. It's no longer V-Log L, and we also get V-Gamut. Now there's two different modes for V-Log and also in just other shooting modes, but we're going to talk about V-Log real quick. There's a standard way of shooting, and then there is a dynamic boosted way of shooting. If you're in the standard mode, your stops of dynamic range is about 12 plus, which probably means 11.5 at the end of the day. And your base ISO, the white paper says it's 250 ISO, but the leaked video showed that it was 800. So that might just be a release firmware thing. We don't know. We'll find out, but that is the difference between the two. Next up, we have the boosted way of shooting. For V-Log, you'll get up to 13 plus of dynamic range. So probably 12.5, I don't know. And your base ISO jumps all the way up to 2000, which is a lot. So if you're going to be shooting in this mode, you're most likely going to have to bring a bunch of ND filters with you just to be able to get exposure. It's a little unfortunate, but it kind of makes sense because the way they are boosting dynamic range is something that Canon did. I don't remember what they called it, but it was like a dual gain, not dual gain, but like a dual ISO way of shooting. It's not the exact same thing, but basically it's kind of like a wide dynamic range photo. You're gonna take a signal that's underexposed, you're gonna take a signal that's overexposed, you're gonna mash them up in the middle. And what happens is your shadows from that overexposure is gonna have more detail, and they can use that. And then the underexposed is trying to protect the highlights. So your highlights get more detail and dynamic range, and then they mash it up together to get that 13 plus stops. So that is kind of a cool thing, because the next part is they also talk about a new noise reduction algorithm, mainly from the processor. They said something about 2D and an advanced 3D thing, but the TLDR, I believe, is what they're trying to say is, hey, we have something that can recognize noise, chroma noise, we're going to take it out, but we're also going to try to leave as much detail as possible. At the end of the day, that's basically what they're trying to say with this noise reduction. Speaking of noise, when we are at higher ISOs, the leaked video did show him going through 3200, 6400, then 12800 ISO between the, I believe, the GH5 and the new GH6. From my eyes, it seems like you only really start to see some sort of noise crummy pattern from a compressed video at 12,800. You can kind of see it at 6,400, which is probably like most people's little like max that they're comfortable with. But if they really have to push it, it seems like 12,800 might technically be usable, which is great because on a GH5, I would say 800 was where you could comfortably push it in a pinch. But if you really, really had to go, 1600 was probably as far as I would personally go before the image started doing weird stuff. So that does seem very promising that we might finally have a really nice high performing ISO in the GH6 lineup. Last but not least, with all this power inside, one of the cool features, and I'm pretty sure they did this because they want this camera to be Netflix approved, it shoots internal ProRes 422 HQ. That's awesome. That was something that people were talking about, and I kind of wrote it off. I was like, there's no way they're going to put ProRes into a GH6. Well, here it is. And I think they're specifically only sticking with ProRes 422 HQ because of Netflix. I personally would like to see ProRes 422, ProRes 422 Lite, even possibly ProRes Proxy. Those are more useful for what I need to do. And I don't know if this is one of those things where Panasonic is like, hey, those are coming out in future firmware. Because if there's one thing Panasonic is awesome at, it's giving us more through firmware later. So I would love to see more ProRes options, because the next part is that you don't have two card slots that are the same. You have a CFast Type B, and then you have an SD that's capable of going up to UHS 2, I believe. Obviously, the CFast Type B is for those high bitrate video codecs because you are able to shoot in 5.7, 5.8 open gate on this sensor. So you're getting a lot of resolution, and also the ProRes 422 HQ. Again, with the other ProRes flavors, I would be able to hopefully shoot it onto the SD card. But what really bothers me is that with this camera, especially with the GH5 that had dual SD card slots, now it kind of doesn't make sense anymore, because if you're shooting at a higher bit rate, you can't just have a dual copy onto the SD card, because the SD card probably can't handle it. I really wish that they could have possibly used the dual card slot from the Sony a7S III, where the CFast and the SD card are comboed, and then they have two of each. That would have been amazing. But unfortunately, we don't see that here. That's probably something they're going to leave for the Panasonic S1H, honestly. But it would have been nice to see some sort of uniformity in terms of the SD cards. But that being said, there is a USB-C port, generation 3.2. Do we know that it's going to give us external recording to SSD? According to the white papers, it doesn't mention anything about it. And quite honestly, Panasonic, at this point in time, you should have this, because it's just a better way to go and allows you to push your camera a lot further instead of being confined to a CFast. I know not a lot of people want to shoot to SSD, but I think it's just something that we should have by now with higher end cameras in this price range. All right, so that's all of the major cool stuff that I think most people really want to know. Now let's dive in a little bit deeper in terms of some of the other cool features that are in this GH6 that will most likely trickle to the upper line of the S1H. So when it comes to recording formats, you either have an MOV format or an MP4. With the MOV, you can do H.264, H.265, as well as ProRes HQ. With the MP4, you're only stuck with H.264, H.265, that's something you need to know. But one cool thing is with the H.264, 5, and ProRes on the MOV side, you actually can get 24-bit audio recording into the camera at 48 kilohertz. Generally speaking, even on my Sony a7S III, you're getting 16-bit at 48 kilohertz. So they're actually bumping this up, which is, you know, it's very welcomed. And when it comes to the MP4, you are bumped back down to 16-bit audio recording. So if audio is something that you really want to work with going internally to your camera, which Panasonic has had really good audio preamps, then that's something you can understand between the two formats. And of course, if you have that original hot shoe adapter to get XLRs, you now can actually shoot 4 channels of audio, which is great because that really packs things down if you don't want to bring a whole bunch of stuff with you and just want to have everything compacted in, or maybe in a broadcast setting, what have you. This is definitely a great feature. Next up, they actually have internal A/B points for your follow focusing system. So with your fly-by-wire lenses that don't have any hard stops whatsoever, you can actually tell it, hey, once we reach this focus, don't go any further. Once we reach this focus, don't go any further. And they also do have the customization, according to the white paper, that you can either tell the lens to go non-linear, so traditional fly-by-wire, or have a focus throw of 180, 90, 360, whatever. You can control that. What we don't know is what lenses actually support this feature, because something tells me Panasonic might pull one of these moves where they say, oh, this only works for the high-end Leica lenses that we have. So if you have Olympus Micro Four Thirds lenses or third-party Micro Four Thirds lenses, or even one of our old, like, really fun 42.5, 1.8 prime, those are not going to work. I really hope that is not the case, because that will kind of damage what we can do, because a lot of us has some really good Micro Four Thirds lenses from yesteryear, and we would like to be able to use those lenses in this linear focus fashion. So hopefully that is a thing. We'll find out soon enough. Next thing is, if you're shooting in anamorphic mode, if you use an HDMI output to a monitor, you can finally monitor it in de-squeezed, because in the original GH5, and I don't know why they didn't fix this with firmware, or at least add it, probably because they didn't want to, they gave you a 4:3 signal, and if you de-squeezed it in the monitor, it stayed in that 4:3, and that's all you saw. It didn't actually expand all the way out, and that's simply because the HDMI was feeding a 4:3 signal, and they didn't fix it. So now it's not a problem. If you're an anamorphic shooter, this is definitely going to be a good feature for you. So the last bit that I want to talk about is the design of the camera body, in which I am actually very excited for how they're designing it. Because honestly speaking, if everything that I've talked about so far, especially with the whole Netflix camera ability, this is essentially the Micro Four Thirds version of a S1H. And I think depending on how you are in your camera ecosystem, having one of these little cameras still being able to do a lot of what the S1H can do, this is going to be helpful. So first of all, we have a much chunkier body compared to the GH5, which is funny because the GH5 was much chunkier than the GH4. Like when I got my GH5, it was crazy how much bigger it felt in my hands. So now this is even bigger, which can be a good thing, because for people out there that still like to shoot with the GH5 with the Sigma 18-35 Viltrox or speed boosted combo, having a much heavier camera now probably will make it much easier for you to balance in general on a gimbal if that's what you want to do. So I'm happy that this is actually much chunkier and bigger in build. And because of that, there is a cooling fan, because if you're going to be shooting in ProRes 422HQ, I'm going to guess that that thing is going to get hot. So this fan has a bunch of different modes according to the white paper to ensure that you can shoot continuously in these higher end modes. A thing that they brought over from the S1H that I really, really love is that really hybrid tilt and fold out screen. So there are times where I don't want the flippy screen to flip out, because it just doesn't help me with how I'm shooting. I'd rather have it tilt like one of the Sony cameras. So the fact that we have a hybrid version, they brought it to the GH6, again, just makes it that much easier for production. Again, I really think they're trying to hit a Netflix camera here. Then a couple last things to really know about is there's a tally lamp. There is a tally lamp. According to the white papers, it's there. And if you take a look at these pictures, it's right there as well. This is great. So people know when you're recording, people know when you're not recording, everyone's happy on set. On the bottom side, I really wish more cameras do this so that they don't force you to buy a cage that may or may not work really well, but we have that extra hole there. So with most quick release plates, there's that extra little hole where we can basically just keep the camera from shifting and loosening off. So this is great that they someone finally put it on a DSLR camera body. And the one last thing I want to talk about is battery life, because in the white papers, it said what it should be able to do, which is if you're shooting in 4K, 60 frames a second, I believe, and it still uses the original GH5 type battery, including the new one as well. They're both the same form factor. They say you can get anywhere from like 80 to 90 minutes, but then they said actual recording, and it says something about 45 minutes. it makes sense because now we have all these features and it's going to take up a lot more power. But it is a little discerning that we went from a GH4 that literally lasted for, I think, 3 hours per battery. Then the GH5 got cut in half, where it kind of lasted about an hour and a half per battery. Still not bad. And now we seem to be cutting it in half one more time to possibly 45 minutes per battery. Now, we don't know if the USB-C will allow us to do power delivery. I hope so. I think the GH5 might have done it. I don't know. I really didn't care about that camera. But if that's the case, cool. But when it comes to SSDs, I'd rather be able to record onto an SSD. Okay, so that is the white paper, the leaked video, mashing them all together, and giving you my thoughts. So the final bit is, do I want the GH6? Now, I apologize because I'm probably going to ramble because I'm really trying to process, does this even make sense for me right now after I've just read everything? So the GH6, no doubt, is a huge step up from the GH5. And yes, I still have the GH5. I love this camera. I'm not getting rid of it. It is a workhorse, and I still actively use it on this YouTube channel for a lot of different shots. It's such a big step up. We got better ISO, technically better autofocus, still to be determined. We have these different modes, the boost and dynamic range, so we can get cleaner shadows, non-clipped highlights, and then the new noise reduction algorithm if you're really in a pinch to try to retain detail. We have the linear follow focus lenses, the internal A/B points, the fact that this camera is basically Netflix ready, most likely out of the go at $2,500, which is the rumored price. And then we take a look at just like everything else that they give you. I've said for a long time that if the GH5 just had good autofocus for me in these YouTube situations, then I wouldn't have ever gone to Sony because I love the Micro Four Thirds system. Most people say, but full frame, you'll get better color, you'll get better depth of field and stuff like that. And I'm just like, yeah. I mean, the GH5 also has great color. It just doesn't have the deep depth of field. Sorry, shallow depth of field. I don't necessarily like shallow depth of field all the time. I actually prefer the Micro Four Thirds sensor to give me that 2 stops deeper. Because a lot of the shots that I do, I don't want to just focus on your eye. I want to be far enough back with nice, awesome double of the compression, but I still can see the full character for the narrative films, and especially in action sequences. I don't want to suddenly be like, you're fighting this person and he's completely in focus and the other guy who's stacked over here is slightly out of focus. I don't want that. I want you to see everything. So the GH5 technically makes the most sense in what my personal aesthetics are. But I do love the Sony a7S III. I love that I can use full frame lenses now. All those Rokinons that I bought that are full frame, my vintage lenses that are full frame, there is this nice nuance of a full frame sensor versus a Micro Four Thirds. So there's a part of a chance that the GH6 eventually, not soon, but eventually might be playing with my a7S III together, because I feel like both of them can give me what I need and I'll be good to go. But at the same time, the GH6 is the same price as the a7 IV, and the a7 IV is a really good camera. And based on how I could use it in full frame mode and APS-C mode, because the Sigma 18-35, that's an APS-C lens. My Sigma 50-150, that's an APS-C lens. So if I wanted to stay zoomed and have like a nice, not a lot of rolling shutter for people that care, I can go back to my principal cinema lenses that I was using on the GH5 to begin with. But I can still use the full frame. So at the end of the day, it's going to be hard for me to say, obviously I want all of these cameras because I love cameras and I love to play with them and use them in different situations. But we all know I can't just spend money. Nobody can just spend money to buy all these different cameras and call it a day. But I think for me personally, and for people that have left into the Sony camp, it probably makes a lot more sense just to get the a7 IV. But because I do have a soft spot for Panasonic, I am going to wait to see if Panasonic gives us more firmware updates to the GH6 that gives us features that we don't know about. Because the white paper didn't say anything like that. I have a feeling on Monday, They're going to say, hey, we have a roadmap of firmware updates and this is what we're going to roll out. Maybe they're going to give us more ProRes flavors. I hope so. Some people might be like, what about ProRes RAW? Maybe. Panasonic does have some sort of development with Blackmagic. Could we get internal B-RAW? Please, that would be amazing. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that can happen. So long story short, if I had all the money in the world, I would buy a GH6 and pre-order right away because I want to use it with my A7S III. But ideally speaking, I'm probably going to end up going with an A7 IV later down the road, probably by the end of the year or next year, and have my full narrative kit there. And my GH5 will still be my trusty backup. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I don't know what I'm going to do on Monday because I'm basically on a shoot and I'm on work, so I won't be able to do a live stream to give you my thoughts. But if that is something you guys want to see, then go ahead and leave a comment down below. I'll get to them as fast as I can. And maybe we'll do a live stream about my thoughts after the whole bit. So anyways, that is it. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'll see you guys basically after the Panasonic reveal.